First of all, I'd like to create some spirit in the room. So I'm going to go from the left to the right, and I need you all to stand up and cheer as loud as you can. Arms in the air, there you go. Before I introduce myself, I would like to thank Annette Reichman, ASDB Superintendent, and ASDB for allowing us to host this event at the BPAC. So again, thank you. It's truly appreciated. You know, it's funny. It's almost surreal. I actually remember sitting right where Bobby is sitting almost 6 years ago. I graduated from ASDB. I remember walking down the stage, receiving my diploma, and going to Gallaudet. As a student at Gallaudet and graduating, I decided since to move back. And yes, sure enough, fun fact, I am an alumni of ASDB. So to formally introduce myself, I am James Wilson IV, current president of the Association for the Deaf, Arizona Association of the Deaf, AZAD. I'm sure if I go into detail what that organization's about, you probably will keel over in boredom. So our objectives as an organization is to preserve the cultural and linguistical aspects of deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing individuals in the state of Arizona. So I'm here to promote awareness. If you're looking for more information on what AZAD represents, please come see me at the reception after the event. So before I introduce our special guest, I'd like to tell you a personal story of Roberta Bobby Cordano and my experiences with her. So before I entered Gallaudet, I didn't realize that they had gone to 2 different administrations. Alan Horowitz to Bobby Cordano. So within the process of searching for the new president, they came to the decision to choose Roberta Cordano in October. And of course, we all knew who the new president was. So December came along, Christmas break, everyone went back to their families, to their homes, their loved ones, and traveled. So starting the school year in January, we would see Bobby interacting in the common areas, in the cafeteria, and I'd see her from afar. On this particular weekend, a blizzard hit DC. Now this blizzard, as a native Arizonian, I don't know, if I was the president of the United States, or excuse me, of the university, I probably wouldn't know what to do. So sure enough, 3 dormitories and other buildings, the Keller Apartments, Kendall Apartments, lost power, all the buildings were closed, but Bobby managed it very well. So she is a native Minnesotan. She is from Minnesota. So I'm sure all the students were wondering, what is our new president planning on doing? Her leadership, her performance, her adaptation to that situation was impressive. And I don't think she actually needs any introduction at this point. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Gallaudet University President Roberta Bobby Cordano.
So I handed him his degree just last spring, and he graduated from the university. I'm sure you remember walking across that stage. So he's president of the Arizona Association of the Deaf, has already returned here since graduation. And I think that's proof, as I look out in this audience, proof that Gallaudet graduates really create change. We create change makers, leaders, and innovators at our university. And in the audience here, if you're not a graduate of Gallaudet, or you are one of them, or you didn't go, maybe you've been touched by one of them, or influenced by one of them, I know for me personally, As I grew up, Gallaudet was very much the heart and soul of our community in so many ways. And I know one of our values at Gallaudet is whether or not you've been in an educational setting, whatever that might be, we still continue to learn from one another and associate with one another. And so that's why I'm delighted to be with you this evening, to share some information about research that's coming out of Gallaudet, and to share with you information that you can take with you and share with others. We hope that you really get to an understanding of how this can impact you and what it means for you, that it will result in some reflection, something worthy of thinking about, and maybe adding some new vocabulary as you reflect on some of the remarks and how they might apply to you. This is new research that's been conducted, and it's really changing the way in which we perceive and understand ourselves, how we understand our language, how we understand our community, and how we understand our future. Next slide, please. So I was asked to come and share some remarks on this title, Brains, Babies, and Sign Language. We talk about bilingualism, and of course I have the word ASL here, and I think there's two things about dual language that I wanted to speak on this evening. And one is the fact that, well, tonight I'm going to be talking about English and ASL. I know that many of us here understand the impact of living in a country where English is, in fact, the language of our country. It's the dominant language that we use in our workplaces, in our social environments. English is used in all of its forms, written, spoken, printed forms. But often, I think we need to give a little more emphasis to ASL, more so than English. And if you could move to the next slide, please. If we look around, many people who are here this evening, and especially some of you whom I know are here, have of course understood that American Sign Language was recognized as a language in 1960. And I'm sure many of you were around who are here in the audience when that discovery was made. If you think about it, 1960 was the date that this happened. What is that, 58 years ago, right? So, I mean, that's almost as old as I am, if you can think of that. Not that old, I mean, I'm close to 58, not quite 58. But I think that will give you a sense, I mean, if you think about how old our language is, since it's been identified as a language. Now, of course, we know sign language was around long before that, but it was identified as an official language 58 years ago. And that's important to remember. And I say that because, you know, we still have a lot of road in front of us. I don't know if you remember when William Stokey declared American Sign Language was a language, and the deaf community's response was just that he was making this up, that it wasn't a language. I can remember living in a small town in Wisconsin, and we were all completely in denial that this information was accurate. We have English, we have spoken language, there's no way American Sign Language could be a real language. I don't know if you all felt that way, we were not ready to accept that fact, but in fact, its research has proven that it is the case. And so now we've accepted that fact, and 58 years later, it's pretty much been a fact of life that we all hold to. And yet, the world continues to struggle to understand what it is. What is American Sign Language? So think about it. American Sign Language is the first language in the world to be recognized as a language. And that was just 58 years ago. And so I would say probably more like in the last 20 years, research and leadership has been such that we've identified about 121 other sign languages throughout the world that have been officially recognized as bona fide languages. So there are still about 350 more sign languages out there that have yet to be identified and verified through research as being official languages. I mean, for every spoken language in the world that's out there, there is a corresponding sign language that exists. Wherever deaf people have sign language, there are actual bona fide languages. And often, we want to give ASL more emphasis, and we do so because of that very important fact, that it's just been 58 years that this language has been identified as a bona fide language. And so what that means is that equity and our respect and our acceptance, our recognition, and our promotion of ASL has fallen far behind that we've seen with spoken English. English continues to be the language equated with success in this world. At least here in the United States, that's the case. And we all are very familiar with that fact. I hope that after my remarks this evening, you'll come to understand the irony. When you expose all children, and not just deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind children, but all children, and remember, I'm talking about hearing children as well. When you expose them to a visual language, their brains thrive. They thrive differently than if they are only monolingual. And so what we're learning has dramatically changed the way we think about ourselves and understand who we are and what our future will be. It's the battle that the research has begun, the battle that we actually strive towards achieving language equity between English and American Sign Language. And yes, we have received equal status in some ways, but we also recognize that ASL is a language of growth, a language for our children and their personal growth. Growth that will equate to success later in their lives. So my proposition for you to consider is that very one. So unfortunately, I did some editing of the slide, and as a result, one of the bullet points is not visible. But, you know, I've said, of course, over and over here already, 58 years ago, ASL was recognized as a language. But let's go back a bit further to the 1890s in the Milan Conference. At the Milan Conference in 1890, they banned the use of sign language in the education of deaf children. And what is most impressive and most notable is that we as a community really should recognize our persistence, our stubborn persistence throughout all these years. It is quite remarkable. The suffering of many children, of many adults, where people were told repeatedly that sign language was insignificant and was not to be recognized and not a language of any kind of distinguish. And 110 years before Milan apologized to the deaf community, it took 110 years before Milan apologized to the deaf community. And yet, without that apology, we continue to persist and thrive. You know, we are a community of people who are stubborn, who are steady in our way, and we're very proud of who we are and how far we've come. And Gallaudet, through it all, has remained strong and steady. Because of our alumni, because of our faculty and our staff, our members of the board, it's all of you who led us through those times, those eras of struggling and through discovering of who we are and defining the place within which we know we exist, that place that we call home, where we sign, where we can be fully visual people. And what's powerful is that we here in the United States, again with the recognition of sign language and with our fighting of our rights, including movements like Deaf President Now, including the fight for ADA, this has led to an opening up of the possibilities for deaf people throughout the world so that they can recognize their sign languages as well. And that's important for you to remember. So I think many of you are aware of these challenges. You live and breathe them and have been for quite some time. If we look in the area of healthcare, I can remember when I interviewed with the board, and I do have to tell you, we have a former board member here with us, Harvey Goodstein, right here in the front. You can blame him for my presidency. So if I give a poor presentation tonight, you can blame him for it. So I can remember being asked a question, what does success look like for me should I become president of Gallaudet? And honestly, the answer is pretty simple. Success for all of us as a community is when babies are born and their parents first look in their eyes without tears, but with tears of joy and happiness, knowing that that child is going to be okay and that there's a future for them. When parents see deaf babies, very often they feel grief, which results in a lot of shedding of tears. And babies know that. They can sense that sadness. They feel our emotions as parents. And this is why it's so very important to the future of our deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind children that we make these changes. Because the stories of the past that have been carried on throughout the years are really wrong narratives. There's a new story to be shared. And when I say they're wrong, I'm talking about the world doesn't understand our language and our visual language, and so they passed on these stories about English being so very important, and the emphasis has been on spoken language, and that's the issue that's not right. Science has finally caught up with what we as the deaf community have always known. We've known that there's nothing wrong with sign language. I mean, I've been president of Gallaudet, and I am because American Sign Language is my first language. My native language and English is my second language. There's no doubt about that. That's a simple truth. But it's now finally that the science has caught up and provides scientific verification of that. The best weapon when we have information to share is being able to share that data with others. And we are seeing the effects of the Milan Conference in the area of healthcare, even to this day. You know, with Milan, speech was required, and that notion has been passed down throughout the ages to various fields and professions. And we are now encountering individuals who have been influenced by this philosophy. And we have now to counter that other information so we can help shift those perspectives. If those of you who are students in ASL and Deaf Studies classes, it's your job to change your professions that you go into, to tell people to re-examine the assumptions that they hold in those various professional fields, the assumptions they have about sign language. That's the work of the young people moving forward. So all of you out there, this is a call to action to you, to change those fields and those professions and the beliefs that they have about deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind people about our language. Next slide. You know, this is one of the most exciting times in academia and areas of research and study. More and more people are exploring different questions in a variety of different areas, and our research and our thinking on these topics are quite interesting, and science and language and culture is being studied like it never has before. We know that early screening of infants is extremely important. The earlier that we do these hearing screenings, the earlier we can catch these children and provide them language access. You know, I dare us to try to do one better than that. Imagine a world where every baby was just taught sign language. Every single baby, right? We teach spoken language to every single baby. So if we would just do that, expose every baby to sign language. And I'll explain why that's important later in the science that backs that up, but can you imagine a world such as that? You know, I don't think we have to wait for a screening. There's something wrong with the system. I think we should just begin teaching every child 2 languages, and that's our future. And again, if we think about the holistic monitoring within our healthcare, meaning that when we see a child, we focus exclusively on their ability to hear, and we miss the whole child and the focus on that whole child. We need to look to the child's needs to provide nourishment and love and care, and an ability to share and a sense of connection and belonging between that parent and that infant. Every single child needs that, and that's our obligation to make sure that happens. And this last bullet point is where we still need work. Our work is not done yet, by no means. Our work is simply not done. We absolutely have to help fight for the rights of parents, current and deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind children, Those parents who just don't have the information, or they get different information from different professionals, and they have to manage and filter all the information they're being bombarded with, and how much that really affects their experience. So, you watch TV every day, right? You know, you play those video games every day, and yet there's a need out there that is so great that our engagement is absolutely necessary and required. And I will tell you, there's another reason why you should be engaged. Did you know that the more social connections that you have in your life, it's a guarantee that you will live longer as a result? It's not so much about how much you exercise, or if you gain or lose weight, or it's not if you eat more sugar than you do by having, food with vitamins. It's more about your connections with other people that results in longer lives. So get out there and meet people, help other people, support others, and share the information that they need to know to make the best decisions and improve the lives of our deaf and hard of hearing babies, teenagers, and adults. Next slide. The wonderful thing is that we made this discovery 58 years ago that ASL is a language. And the next question always that comes after you make that discovery, or that researchers will ask, is, well, is there a culture if there's a language? Is there a culture associated with that language? And yes, indeed, there is. We have ASL literature, we have ASL dramatic performances in theater, and all of these discoveries were made. And I think the beauty of that, it really includes people who are here. We went from a language to a culture to our civil rights. And again, I am here because of that fight, showing that deaf people can achieve, that deaf people have the right to lead the only university in the world that teaches in a bilingual ASL and English environment. And 30 years later, after DPN, I stand here as the president, the first deaf female president, because of DPN. And I'm sure you all know, as well as Harvey, who's here. Others of you were here during DPN and are very familiar with it. We have a lot of people who were involved back then. And this is where we need to remember that we have made great progress. And we have known that for deaf babies, ASL is optimal. But the question is how is it that the brain works? And next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about that, how that's true. Next slide. We see when babies do not have access to sign language and they have deprivation of sign language. Some people talk about the sign we use for deprivation, not that it's never going to be given to the child, but that it's held off, and maybe language stimulation doesn't come until later, it's delayed. But we know that the educational opportunities to learn decline if there's no language access. And we know if a person is well educated, there's certain things that will be the case. Education definitely is attributed to success, and success is attributed to the amount of money that you earn. This year we celebrate the 200th anniversary of deaf education in the United States. 200 years ago, the first school for the deaf was founded in Hartford, Connecticut by Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. 200 years ago. And that school was the first school that began teaching through the use of sign language. It was a realization, of course, from France that visual language and visual experience is actually very helpful, and it works for deaf children when they get that kind of stimulation. It creates stimulation in their brain and the ability to learn and flourish. And now 200 years later, again, the science is finally catching up with what we knew was true from the very beginning. Next slide. Again, no language, it really limits our ability to understand and our growth of our brain. Next slide. I want to focus on something that pertains to my experiences here in Tucson and Phoenix, and that your teams at these two schools have provided me with the warmest welcome I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I'm just so thrilled with what I'm seeing here. It's extraordinary. I know you bring new leadership to these schools and new ways of thinking, and I certainly appreciate all that I've seen. I did want to mention, though, and focus on bullet point number 2 that's up here. You know, one thing that we're dealing with is our understanding of how we interact with the world with people who have different points of view. And one thing with this is that those of us who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind, those of us who are signers, have a point of view such that we understand ourselves. I mean, you've all heard the Gallaudet story, right? You know, some of you are alums and you hear about their experiences at Gallaudet, and they will share stories about that time. But what's challenging, and what we all are challenged with, are other points of views that are very different from who we are and our understanding about who we are. So I want to challenge us to rethink the way that we respond to these differing perspectives that others hold of us and our deafness and our deaf experience. And let me just give you an example. There's a perception that deaf people must be able to speak first, that ASL should be something that they acquire later. And that comes from the fact that if you don't speak first, then you'll never be able to learn English if you learn ASL first. And so that's a perception, and we call this epistemologies. You know, obviously this is kind of an academic person who wrote this PowerPoint slide. That's the person. I love the word anyway, so I'll tell you a little bit about what it means if you don't mind. Don't worry. It just means different perspectives of deaf people. So you have this one perspective that's different from the perspective that we as deaf people hold. Some people wonder why it's important to sign. They say that it's kind of an animal language, a monkey language, that it's stupid, or that they feel stupid signing, and so therefore insignificant. That's another perspective. So when we encounter these varying perspectives that differ from our own, very often we have an emotional response. It's emotionally triggering for us, and we react in anger and confrontation. So I would like to offer that we rethink some of the way we approach these kinds of perspectives. Maybe we should rethink not so much our approaches, but you know, there are many deaf people who are older than I am that I look to as my heroes, my sheroes. And they always told me, you know, anger and confrontation is not going to get us anywhere. It's important that we understand the other perspective first, learn from them, and then gradually, eventually move them into our world. Confrontation doesn't do that. It's not going to succeed. Instead, it does the opposite. It pushes people away. We cannot blame people for these different point of views. They were taught these ideas somewhere. So we just need to show patience. You know, this is a time that calls for patience and understanding as we bring people gradually into our perspective, into our worldview, and we can do so through sharing of scientific evidence. I think this is evidence right here, as shown in this quote. Science has shown that the language center in your brain is right behind your ears, the auditory cortex. And when you hear the word auditory, we automatically equate that with hearing and spoken language, especially given its proximity to the ear. And so we think sign language must be processed elsewhere in the brain. But in fact, that's not the case. These areas of the brain, and I've never seen Dr. Petito say this, so I probably get in trouble with her because she is a true bona fide scientist, and I take my liberties as president to say things that I think I can, right? I think I can do that as president, right? Take a few liberties here. I assume that's all right. So I call these areas of the brain language areas, not auditory areas, because we find that when you stimulate a baby through providing them input through sign language, those areas of the brain activate. And when you expose them to multiple languages, we see multiple activation in the brain in multiple areas. And the brain doesn't care whether or not the language that it receives comes through the eyes or through the ear. From the time a baby is born, That baby's brain is looking for patterns of information wherever it comes. The brain is seeking out patterns. And those patterns actually happen in that particular area of the brain found right behind the ears. And scientists have tested and retested hearing babies and deaf babies, stimulating them to all kinds of languages, and time again they've seen the same thing, that this is exactly where brains process language. That's where brain stimulation happens, that's where the neurons fire, and we are seeing this happening all the time. So when we have deaf babies and they're stimulated with a visual language at birth, their visual acuity and their eye tracking, their peripheral vision is heightened more so than babies who are hearing. Hearing babies absolutely lose those areas of the brain because they don't continue to get that language stimulation. In fact, deaf brains have advantages to hearing brains. Did you know that? Were you aware of that? Hearing babies often don't get that visual stimulation. It all comes auditorily. And so the way their brain functions is such that without that stimulation, those areas of the brain die away. And that's why visual language is so important for both hearing babies and deaf babies. It's stimulation that keeps those tissues in the brain activated. And you probably heard me say, you know, it's not the brain that discriminates against language, it's people that do. Brains don't discriminate against language, it's people. And we know that bilingual brains with deaf babies, you know, if parents actually read to the baby and finger spell to them, those are early ways that lead to literacy and help develop the deaf babies' brains. And if they can hear and we expose them to auditory input and visual input, they're able to pick up and acquire 2 languages from birth. And we have seen time and time again, I have some pictures here to show you, that a brain that's a bilingual brain has more activation in other areas of the brain than those brains that are just monolingual brains. So let's look at the next slide. It's evidence right there. And it's interesting that we see babies that have visual stimulation. Their computational skills are advanced. We're seeing that their vocabularies are such that they're acquiring vocabularies faster. They have more activation in their brain, and their brains therefore are more vibrant. So back to the argument about the importance of having exposure to spoken language, to sound first, so that you can learn language, and then after that, teaching a child sign language. Not true. Language should come first, whatever way it can be exposed to the brain, whether it's visually, auditorily, or tactily for deafblind children. And research is out there. I think we should watch the next 10, 20 years to see what's going to be happening with pro-tactile communication, using the body and stimulating the body in different ways of language patterns that can be expressed through the body. We're going to see the same kind of evidence. I'm absolutely confident that that will be the case. So it's just our brain's ability to take in information, no matter where it comes, in any part of the body. Your brains are just absolutely wonderful things. They really are. The red areas are the deaf native signers and the areas of activation in their brains. Green, people who can hear and don't sign. And the yellow areas are where we see the overlap. Look at the red areas. Do you see those areas in red? I mean, if anyone ever tries to tell you, oh, poor deaf baby, you can fight back and say that baby will be fine because it has visual stimulation. They'll have a healthier brain than most other children. You know, the problem is not the deaf child, the problem is the language exposure that that child has. And not only that, but it's our attitude towards language. It's the attitude and the resistance to beliefs that might be true. Beliefs about sign language being equal to spoken languages like English. And not just that. We'll have to admit, I know for me, I grew up in a time where I was also convinced that English was more important for me in order to be able to thrive and succeed. And also for me, I already had sign language. I already had that as a native language. It was a part of our life. I didn't have to think about it. And yet our parents drilled into us the importance of English. And that served me well, no doubt about that. I've been very successful because I have mastery of both languages. But I, even myself, had to reflect on my attitudes about ASL as a professional woman. You know, I'm trained as an attorney. Right? Lawyers don't argue about ASL. Lawyers don't argue in using ASL. So I had to think to myself, what would a court that's conducted in sign language look like? I know that at the deaf community, they have set their own rules and their own laws and regulations. I think it would look very different than what we see today in the rest of society. Many of our values, those that we hold, are very different. We would probably write different rules and different procedures, and I actually think our courts would be a lot more fair. And not only that, but the way we question others, I think everything would be videotaped, there would be no court reporter, the evidence would be right there visually. You know, you never know, court reporters can get information wrong, but think about how that would be. But to dream of that as myself, as a person who was trained as an attorney, I really had to admit it was really tough to get to that place where I didn't look to English as being the focus. It's really forced me to reconsider and rethink the way I view ASL. Remember, I grew up in a world where I used both languages, and so tonight I want to convey to you, and I hope in the sense when you leave will be that this is not a topic of argumentation. You know, whatever it is we take away and what we believe, I hope that you leave with something that helps you understand that it's important to examine what your beliefs are. What are the beliefs that may no longer be true? What are the beliefs that you've held on to that we need to let go of in this world? And what is something different we can create for ourselves and for others? Use this as a time to imagine the world that you would like to see. You know, I have no surefire answer or description about what that world should look like. It's our world to create together as we move forward. And the possibilities are endless. So this is important. This first bullet point is very important. Milestones for deaf babies who are exposed to ASL compared to those babies who are exposed to English or any spoken language are achieved at the same time. From birth to 6 months, typically the milestone is such that we see babies beginning to babble. And of course we know there's babbling in ASL and English. Spoken language and sign language babbling happens at the same milestone. At the 1-year mark, there's one-word utterances. 18 months, 2 years, 2-word utterances. Words begin to be strung together. The exact same milestones are hit in both spoken languages and sign languages. So what does that mean for us in the field of education? You know, we have all this variation of experiences that our deaf and hard of hearing children are exposed to. And it's so challenging, but the problem's never our children, it's the systems. The systems are where the problems are to be found. And we have a lot of work to do to make sure that our children's brains are understood to be just completely fine. They're going to be absolutely fine. That's really the point of all this. It's the system. And it is a possibility. And I think the science actually shows that those babies' brains are completely fine. They can adapt to anything. But it's us that we have to ensure that we are giving them what they need and that we have the system that will support the families so that they can give their children what they need. And I will tell you that my biggest concern, and this is again from a policy perspective, is that language is not some kind of a medication that we give to someone, right? We can give someone a prescription if we want to treat them to resolve the problem that they have. We give them a pill, they take it, and they're healed. That's not how language works. If you want language to thrive in a home environment, the parents need to be within the situation, and siblings and grandparents, so where everyone is learning sign language. Right? We can blame doctors, but you know, it's not the doctors to be blamed. If you think about the doctor's toolkits, they only have hearing aids and cochlear implants and all the medicine and medical devices and all the tests that they possess that can be found in those toolkits. So where is the language information? It's not in their toolkit, right? Hospitals don't pay for it, doctors don't pay for it, insurance companies don't pay for it. So if we look to the field of healthcare, education has said that we look to the healthcare system, to the education system, and said they're the ones responsible for learning, right? And we know that babies need to be learning from birth. So who sees the child at birth? It's the doctors and the nurses, right? The medical professionals. And so what are we learning now that can change the world to better understand our systems, so that for those of you who are now in college and pursuing careers, you know, try public policy, try law, try public health as your careers. Because the complex challenges of the future means that our young people who are graduating from Gallaudet, the work that's before them is to be able to go into these professions and create systems that will address the complexities that will meet our needs. And language is a developmental need within an entire community of people. It's not about one single child. So that means, you know, healthcare needs to change, the educational system needs to change, the tax system needs to change, the insurance system needs to change, all of these systems need to change, which means we have a lot of work to do. And we look ahead to college education and what that means for all of us. You know, the older generation, my generations, and those who are older, you know, we're leaving a world for these young people that's complex and just fraught with problems. We've created silos that our young people are going to have to work to tear down. You know, we have built these silos and they are not working. And that reflects back to this slide, right? You can see through research what we need to do. Again, I've said this before, but just this verified fact to show that 2 languages provided at the same time at birth are more effective than just one language being provided to the child and then a second language later. Sequentially is not as effective as simultaneously. Our system provides information to our parents, to our families, and our communities that counter that. We need to make sure our babies get what they need. Next slide. So I want to brag now a little bit about Gallaudet and our Visual Language Lab, VL2. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that Gallaudet, I think, has about probably 1,700 students. It's a fairly small liberal arts college. But for a little engine that could, I have to tell you, we are sure leading the world in these areas. You know, we actually have the first cognitive educational neuroscience program in the world that's graduating students with PhDs. And our graduates are deaf. We are now graduating 24 deaf people who are in the pipeline to get a PhD in this field. We probably could not have imagined this 50 years ago. You know, we rock. I have to tell you, we at Gallaudet rock, and it's exciting times right now. Science is beginning to understood. It's really changing our world through research. We have VL2, we have teams that are coming together, deaf studies, ASL, linguistics, all the faculty supporting one another and contributing to our knowledge base in the world. It's absolutely incredible, and it's exciting times to be at Gallaudet. So if you look back here at what you see in this picture. That little white robot has a name. We call it Maki. It's a Maki robot. And Maki is the first robot of its kind in the world that can actually detect, by looking through technology, to determine when the baby's brains are ready for learning. If the baby's crying, the avatar will cease to operate and will disappear because the baby's crying. But when the baby is relaxed and alert and engaged, the avatar will come to life and provide language stimulation in the crib, in the baby's crib. I will bet you that in my lifetime, this Maki will become, of course, much smaller and will be in every crib in America. Because how many times do we put the baby in the crib and they're happy there anyway, and we need a little time for ourselves, right? Right? And so Maki will keep that baby occupied in their crib, exposing that baby to language while there. Artificial intelligence right there. We are doing artificial intelligence at Gallaudet. Robotics, cognitive neuroscience. I mean, this is some cool stuff. And so what we're going to see in terms of technology and how it can advance language for all of our children, not just deaf, hard of hearing and deafblind, this is going to change the world. Okay, next slide. So we at Gallaudet don't do this in isolation, by no means. But we can do it as a community together, undoubtedly. Each of you must continue to carry this information and share this message broadly to help people understand who we are and what the possibilities are. And so please, I ask you to support those families of children who are deaf and hard of hearing, to approach them and teach them and provide them supportive information to help them understand what's possible. The grief that parents express when they have a child that's not like them is profound. It is profound. And I can't blame them for that. But I certainly can have empathy. I can have hope for them, and I can be the person who provides the supportive information and helps them meet the people whom they need to meet and takes them to the places where they need to go. And, if they're open to hear new information, providing that to them. And if they're not, then come back a year later. Don't take no for the final answer. When a family needs you, they need you. You have this information now. Share it. Spread the word. Become one of our citizens and create a better world for everyone in the future.